So, you decided to play right into their hands. A whole roast boar occupied the main table in the hall of Ward Manor. Following over a week of work along the Wyvermark's borders, Ludmilla finally completed her circuit, ending up back in Ward Barony. The Lord of Ward spoke in a tone that carried his displeasure over the results. At first, the commanders of the 5th Legion and their divisions were shocked when she appeared at their garrisons with squads of Death Series servitors and started putting whole companies through their paces together with them. As the days passed and she went from garrison to garrison, however, that initial shock turned into grim resolution. As it was in the interior, rumors in the Empire seemed to grow wings of their own accord. That the situation in the Wyvermark had long been in the making meant that changes to that situation, both potential and real, were acted upon immediately. The 6th Legion learned of the Death Series servitors being positioned on the border and shifted their stance to take advantage of those changes. The 5th Legion's stubborn resistance disintegrated in response to the immediate threat represented by the 6th Legion's shift in stance. In a strange mockery of the Imperial Army's vaunted professional discipline, the two legions moved in lockstep despite their opposition to one another. Not only did the legions move, but civilian agencies as well. Guilds issued advisories to their members and word spread about the increasingly volatile situation in the Wyvermark. "I have my priorities, my lord," Ludmilla replied. "No matter the situation, I had to initiate the integration of supplementary forces ordered by my government." Baron Ward took a long draught of his foam-topped mug, brushing off his moustache with a thumb. While he outwardly appeared sour over the outcome, Ludmilla couldn't sense any genuine antagonism from the venerable frontier noble. There was no point in confronting someone over duty. "Did you speak with General Gregan?" he asked. "I did," the corner of her lip turned down. "I may consider stubbornness a form of resilience on occasion, but I don't think that can be applied here. Has anything like this happened before?" "Not that I can recall," Lord Ward said. "It's entirely expected, though. Each legion is meant to operate as an independent army group within their assigned jurisdiction, answerable only to the Emperor. Every general is used to being, well, the general. Everyone sticks to their respective chains of command, and that's exactly the way it's supposed to be." On paper, it seemed perfectly fine. One could even say it was shrewdly conceived. Every legion had its own jurisdiction and every general was accustomed to wielding absolute authority over their army group. By promoting this independent mentality and keeping each army group distinct and separate from one another, not only did the Imperial Army keep things neat and organized, but coups stemming from collaboration between armies were next to impossible as the legions held each other in check. General Carbane seemed reasonable enough. "The same could be said for every general," Baron Ward replied. "As long as the chain of command is clear, there's no problem. At Katza, we'd have multiple generals present, but the Emperor would always appoint one as commander-in-chief. There's no such distinction here. The 5th and 6th Legions have their respective duties and are operating in their assigned jurisdictions as intended. Pursuit of these respective duties is rapidly fostering antagonism between your two army groups." "I can't deny that," Lord Ward said. "It doesn't sit well with me, but we're locked in a stalemate by design in an unprecedented situation. The Imperial Army operates on a framework of rules. Order is held sacred. Short of getting His Imperial Majesty to order General Gregan to order his commanders to stand down, the 6th Legion won't stop. The 5th Legion similarly will not abandon its duties. Would it be any different for you, my lady?" Ludmilla knew that it wouldn't be. If she was assigned a task, she would pursue its completion to the utmost of her ability. The only one who could countermand her orders was an authority higher than that which had issued those orders. "No, my lord," Ludmilla replied, "but what is going on here seems less a matter of order and more a matter of inflexibility. One side is adamant about implementing a certain solution and neither side is willing to relinquish its position. Both sides simply agree to disagree and they carry on as before. As far as General Gregan has told me, our winter has issued no orders or statements in favor of either side or anything at all for that matter. I suspect you know why that is." "Knowing why doesn't make me feel any better about it," she said. "The Royal Court of the Sorceress Kingdom has asked a question. The Court Council of the Baharuth Empire has given their answer. Now, it is up to the Imperial Army to provide the details. All Imperial elements are playing things strictly by the book, believing that the book will at least provide them with plausible deniability if undesirable outcomes occur." Beside Baron Ward, Joachim Ward looked up from his meal. If the state of affairs displeases you, my lady, he said, then why not tell them to stop? As a representative of the Sorceress Kingdom, the Empire is legally obliged to recognize your absolute authority. Ludmilla glanced at Baron Ward, whose lips drew together in a thin line. Did the temples fill your head with nothing but prayers and nonsense, boy? Or was it that damn ray? The cleric flinched at the cutting reprimand, casting a wordless look over at his grandfather. Lord Ward shook his head with a sigh. All authority comes from something, Baron Ward told him. A noble's authority is entrusted to them by their liege. The policies and laws of a nation are the guidelines by which a noble exercises that authority within their jurisdictions. Order is contingent on obligations being upheld, laws being enforced and policies being followed. Doing so requires strength, ability and will. There are lines that she cannot cross because crossing those lines leads to corruption, decay and the collapse of civil society. I am not here to tell the Imperial Army what to do, Priest Ward, Ludmilla said. I am here to facilitate their answer and ensure that it does not violate the Sorceress Kingdom's official policies. I understand that much, my lady, Joachim replied, but that essentially means that the 6th Legion dictates the situation. Legislation should not be disregarded simply because it becomes inconvenient. Amendments to said legislation would ideally be made as problems are identified, but the Court Council is content with their answer. Unless that changes, the Empire has approved of the way that the 6th Legion is conducting its operation. Joachim looked back down at his plate, his face painted with frustration as he sawed meat off of a bone. Though the faith of the 4 had drifted far in its principles from that of the 6, Ludmilla thought that she could empathize with their position. They still looked out for the well-being of their congregations, yet had no authority in the secular empire. All they could do was watch powerlessly, waiting to react to whatever came. Doing so would often mean that they were the only ones helping to pick up the pieces of lives shattered by soulless bureaucratic machinations. If you don't mind my asking, my lady, Baron Ward said. In our situation, what would constitute a policy violation from the perspective of the Sorceress Kingdom? There are 2 instances where I will act in opposition, Ludmilla told him. The first is if the Empire uses their least security forces in a way that breaches their terms of service. Since the Death Series servitors have been assigned to the 5th Legion, it's clear that they understand this as well and have eliminated the possibility. The second instance would be if the Empire wages an unjustified war with an officially recognized state. Since the Empire is expanding into unclaimed wilderness, however, the risk of that is non-existent unless they end up attacking the kingdoms on the other side. Then it looks like they've covered themselves pretty well, Lord Ward said. The chains of duty bind us all. Baron Ward set his emptied plate aside, calling for a fresh mug of ale. Ludmilla nodded and smiled as the footman came over to refill her drink as well. She cradled the steaming cup of spiced wine in her hands. My question is whether they're doing things this way because they want to, or if they're doing it because they haven't considered their other options. What do you mean by that, my lady? It's something I've noted both in my time with the 2nd Legion and while working in the Wyvern Mark, Ludmilla said. The Empire legally allows demi-humans to exist in its land so long as its laws are observed, but I haven't seen any demi-human residents. The only demi-humans that I've seen traveling unmolested in the Empire were a group of the Sorceress Kingdom's merchants. Additionally, the only other non-human race I've noted living here are elves, and they were slaves. I hear that at least a few demi-humans live in our winter, the Baron said, but you should be right about the rest of it. I believe that the laws allowing demi-humans in the Empire are mostly for the benefit of merchants from the City-State Alliance. The way that Lord Ward responded indicated that he held no particular antagonism towards demi-humans, yet his recognition of the Empire's legal acceptance of demi-humans appeared to be nothing more than a container to stick them in. No matter where she went in the Empire, it felt that its citizens all shared the same perspective. That even those members of fair races like elves were absent the protection of imperial law and subjected to atrocious levels of abuse generated a disturbing undercurrent to the Expeditionary Army's campaign. If the Empire saw merit in capturing tribal populations and sending them to the City-State Alliance to be sold, the slave trade would see a resurgence and encourage even more of the same activity. Tribes could also bring entertainment value to the events of the Grand Arena. Since the primary mode of thinking that revolved around tribal populations had to do with them being dangerous savages, the possibility that the Empire's antagonistic behavior would continue to gain momentum was uncomfortably high. The Lords of the Wyvernmark and the companies of the Fifth Legion appear to be well accustomed to the behavior of the local demi-humans, Ludmilla noted. You've enjoyed over a century of stability and security. Have any attempts been made at tying the tribes in the wilderness either economically or politically to the Empire? You yourself expressed anticipation over the idea that your village might grow into a town because of the trade that will flow through this valley after the wilderness is claimed, but have any attempts been made to trade with the wilderness tribes? I can't say that there have been, Lord Ward replied. Not that I know of, at any rate. It'd be an unjustifiable risk to merchants for unknown gains from tribal demi-humans. She couldn't say he was wrong. Her friends calculated risk, profit and loss like Ludmilla calculated ambushes and waged war. At the same time, that appeared to be the stopping point for everything, a sort of well, we thought about it, but conclusions had been reached with no genuine effort or serious consideration because all they were familiar with were the risks. With the Death Series servitors, she told him, those risks are greatly reduced. Would it not be better to aim for a relatively low-intensity conquest that integrates the demi-human tribes instead of aiming for their wholesale annihilation? I believe that a plan like that would be turned down by the Sixth Legion, Baron Ward told her. Why is that? For the most part, the Empire would be in control of the situation. It's in what you said, control. Also, the Sixth Legion shares a collective purpose in how they're out to make gains for the Empire and be rewarded in return. So the idea would be rejected not only because the Empire desires absolute control, but because it would mean that its territorial gains would be reduced if softer measures are employed? In short, yes. A rich country and a strong army are key to a successful empire. Ludmilla stared down at her wine. Was it because it was the Empire? Because they had long enjoyed a position where human agendas dictated policy and dominated cultural perspectives? The slogan that the Baron had recited could be found everywhere in the Empire, a part of the vision of prosperity and strength shared by its citizens. Everything was to be turned toward that vision of human ingenuity, industry and skill. Dangerous and uncontrollable races with their alien habitats, perspectives and values had no place in it. Was she once like that, as well? Like the Lords of the Wyvernmark and the Imperial Army, House Zaradnik had long defended their border from the intrusion of demi-human tribes. Before the advent of the Sorcerer King and the rise of the Sorceress Kingdom, she had only considered them as threats and her only interactions with them were made in the effort to ensure that they were never in a position to present a critical threat to the Kingdom of Riastais. Mere months ago, Elishnish remarked that Ludmilla still followed human lines of thought. Now, it was as if Ludmilla was looking at a reflection of what she once was, of what she might have been if the Sorceress Kingdom had never appeared and the Empire had annexed Rantel. A proud officer of the Imperial Army, idolized by the citizens and her fellow soldiers. A terror to the savage tribes of the wilderness. Not a single thought would be spared for the circumstances of outsiders save for what she could exploit for tactical and strategic advantage. She looked across the table at the venerable frontier noble who had lived a long life of honored service as a captain of the Empire. My lord, she said, has there ever been a time when you thought that being steadfast wasn't enough? Silence fell between them as he considered her question. Shadows of experiences long past crossed his weathered face. Several minutes went by before he looked her in the eye, conviction gleaming in his firm gaze. Love can go unrequited, loyalty unrewarded. Talent can go unrecognized and justice can go unserved. Yet, our duty must be upheld if order is to flourish. Beyond that, I found that success and failure are ultimately in the hands of the people involved. It was not the staunchly meritocratic view that so many imperial citizens framed the world in. Whether the trials of life had weathered away the polished pretense of an imperial aristocrat or some aspect of his past had balanced his perspective, Baron Ward was a man well aware of the true form of the nation that he served. For the Empire. For all of its faults and failures, Baron Ward and millions of others agreed to take their place in a greater order. Not only to preserve what they thought was good but to achieve the hopeful tomorrow handed down to them through the generations, one that they were groomed to look up to in exclusion of all else. She faced a monolith that could not be swayed through the words of an outsider, a vision of the future where the Empire stood prosperous, secure and at the forefront of the world. This vision was laudable in its sentiment, but it was constructed out of flawed perceptions and prideful ignorance, marching its people toward a future that could never be. It was this vision that needed to change. I see. She rose from her seat. Thank you for everything, Baron Ward. Please let your household staff know that I'll be away tonight. Lord Ward nodded in silent acknowledgement. Ludmilla's boots echoed off of the polished wooden floor as she made her way towards the exit of the hall. What are you going to do, my lady? Joachim asked. She stopped at the door frame, throwing a glance in the cleric's direction. I would be remiss in my duties if I forced the Empire to provide an answer that is not their own, she said. But I can at least ensure that the right people are involved. That's far enough, Cheswin. Ray furrowed his brow at the delayed response to his order. There were always laggards, always men who wanted to finish off their opponent or ransack another primitive hovel. As if they'll get anything out of these. Not that he could complain. He wanted lean and hungry men, and he had them. Every sortie was an opportunity, every tribe was an achievement, every dead enemy another stepping stone on the path to success and glory. Day after day they rode out and wreaked havoc across the wilderness, driving their savage foes before them. As time went on, his soldiers became harder and sharper, shedding the shroud of naivete that came from months of training on friendly soil. It wouldn't be long until he could take his battalion out into the wilderness. And the timing couldn't be more perfect. Not only would he be out of targets in the immediate area of the Imperial border, but the Sorceress Kingdom's liaison officer had moved the undead forces assigned to the 5th Legion to their intended positions around the Wyvern Mark. Several intercepted incursions definitively proved that the borders could easily withstand demi-human assaults with few, if any, casualties. The tentative raiding spurred by Ray's activities rose in frequency and intensity as the other divisions raced to make up for lost ground, but his lead was insurmountable. It would take them as long, if not longer, to blood their men and raise their readiness to the same level as his. While they did that, his battalion would be pulling ahead by leaps and bounds. Now that the Imperial border had become an infallible wall to fall back to, his strategy would proceed apace. The small, disorganized tribes of the wilderness could be scattered with impunity. If organized retaliation happened, his men could fade to safety. Should no such retaliation occur, that was fine too, they would advance and keep making gains. In no situation could he lose. All outcomes were to his advantage. 4 shadows crossed over the dry, rocky gully. Ray shaded his eyes as he cast his gaze towards the afternoon skies. General, we have our next target. Did you confirm what we're facing? It's the same as before, sir. Goblins mostly. A dozen ogres. A handful of mystics and some riding wolves. About 100 all told. Lead the way. The flight pivoted, crossing back over them, and Ray led his men back down the gully. Hoofs struck over the fresh shoots of new growth creeping up from the valley floor as 3 companies of Imperial Knights filtered through the sparse trees. 500 meters, sir. They've made a nice big clearing there. The men will await your signal. Ray turned his attention to the Imperial Knights at the van. Demi-humans, 400 meters ahead. Same signal. Kill them if they stand but leave them if they run. This will be our last target before heading back to camp. In the clearing 100 meters ahead, a sphere of flame expanded amidst the demi-humans who had gathered at the sound of Ray's approaching cavalry. The shrieking cluster of defiant defenders was silenced as the Imperial Knights trampled them. His soldiers swept over the camp, coursing towards the opposite tree line in all directions. Ray trotted his warhorse into the field of broken tents and scattered refuse. His nose wrinkled at the odoriferous stench of unwashed goblins and ogres, staring down at a 3-meter-tall specimen of the brutish and stupid giantkin. The broken end of a lance had punched through its chest, slaying it where it stood. Demi-humans were strong, but their advantages did not make them invincible. With equipment, skill and discipline, humans could overwhelm foes who possessed only savage strength. General Ray, a voice said to his side, request permission to burn the bodies and cleanse this camp. The voice belonged to the senior cleric of his battalion, a balding man with a powerful build and seemingly gentle demeanor. Granted, Ray said. By the way, Bennett, have you heard from Ward recently? Ward, which one? There are 3 Captain Wards, a Priest Ward and a half-dozen others besides. Joachim Ward. I believe he returned from his journey around the Wyvern Mark yesterday evening. He said that he was staying at his grandfather's manor overnight, but I've not received any additional word from him since then. Ray nodded and motioned for the cleric of the Earth God to go about his business. Bennett was reliable in many ways, but too reliable in others. In their rapid movements along the border, he would often ask for time and men to cleanse the aftermath of their raids. He did so irrespective of whether they were pressed for time. His concern was that the negative energy generated by death and conflict would take hold of the land and give rise to undead horrors. Many clerics had transferred to the 6th Legion from the 8th and the 7th. There was a higher ratio of divine casters in the Empire's expeditionary army to ensure that its aggressive posture could be sustained, but many of those clerics considered other aspects of their assignment equally important. Clerics of the Earth God from the 8th Legion were particularly annoying. They insisted on taking preventative measures against the genesis of undead as if every fight would turn the land into another Katza Plains. Hopefully, their open, vehement opposition to the undead would not offend the liaison officer from the Sorceress Kingdom. Ulara, Cheswin, Dace, see if we can't clean this place up a bit. Throw all this garbage into the pyre and expand the clearing while we wait for Bennett to do his thing. It was a convenient location for an outpost, so he may as well make the best of it. According to the 6th Legion's air wing, the valley stretched over 100 kilometers to the south and they would need to secure their supply lines from potential demi-human raids coming from the mountains on either side. If only we had those Death Series servitors at our disposal. According to the information provided to them about the undead leased out to the Imperial Army by the Sorceress Kingdom, the 5th Legion had force enough to conquer everything from the Holy Kingdom of Roblay to the Great Steppe. Ray had to constantly remind himself that this was a test, one that measured the ingenuity and adaptability of the 6th Legion's commanders. If they performed well here, it was likely that they would be able to succeed anywhere. If he stood head and shoulders above the rest, perhaps the Sorceress Kingdom would recommend that Ray be made overall commander of the 6th Legion. It might even be possible that he was offered a position in the Sorceress Kingdom's Royal Army. Ray returned to his encampment, crossing the picket of wooden stakes as the sun lowered towards the rugged peaks to the west. Things looked much as he left them, with companies divided into their respective tasks. A soldier came to take his horse away and Ray made his way to the officers' pavilion at the center of the camp. An unpleasant surprise awaited him, however, the familiar face of Joachim Ward. "Ward, what are you doing here?" "I'm sorry, General," the young cleric replied. "I found out just before you arrived." "You're not making any sense." "Baroness Saradnik, sir. She made her way over to the encampment this afternoon." Frowning at Joachim Ward's words, Ray calmly took inventory of their surroundings. He didn't note anyone resembling a noblewoman around them. "I instructed you to attend to her," he said. "I was," the cleric replied. "I just lose track of her, sometimes." "Were noblewomen so easy to lose?" "They weren't in the 2nd District markets of our winter. There was probably one woman out of every 1,000 men in the 6th Legion and those women were mostly clerics and air officers." "Do you know where she is right now?" Ray asked. "She went to watch the men performing drills out in the field," Joachim answered. "I don't think she's moved from there since checking to see if you were in." According to the reports, the Baroness was a woman in her mid to late teens. Ray was somewhat disappointed at the behavior characteristic of a young woman with far too much freedom and not enough sense. Or was she one of those women who enjoyed watching men sweat it out together as they indulged in perverse fantasies? Ever since Dreams of Red started making its rounds throughout the Empire, it was discovered that there were an alarming number of rotten ladies out there who paired its popular characters every which way. "Well, whatever, at least she's here. Now I can deal with her directly." "Has anything changed from your reports over the last week or so?" Ray asked. "Not particularly, sir. She's been focused on getting the supplementary forces out to the 5th Legion and she's quite pleased with the restraint that the men have shown with everything that has been going on." "What about us? Has she mentioned anything about the 6th Legion?" "Lady Zaradnik has spoken with many of the local lords as well as the members of the 5th Legion, but she appears to be reserving her judgment over the 6th Legion's activities until she sees things for herself." It appeared that Ray wouldn't have to be dealing with someone who had been twisted against him by the views she had been exposed to. At least not openly. He had half expected to be refuting a slew of malignant accusations leveled at him by the local administrators and the 5th Legion. "Have the men prepared anything for her?" "No, sir," Joachim replied. "She's caused quite a stir with her presence in the camp, but nothing's really happened so far. Then let's get some of the men to take a look. Take a look, sir? Get a few of our best scouts, clerics, wizards, get Testania to check for anything strange, too. I want to know as much as possible before I sit down with her. The cleric glanced around the camp before hurrying off to carry out Ray's orders. Ray turned his attention back to the pavilion, frowning at the disorder that had found its way over the furniture. He called his aides over to sort things out before moving to collect the documents on the central table, reviewing what he knew from his accumulated intelligence reports. Baroness Zaradnik had apparently first arrived in the Empire with her friends to see the sights of our winter. They rented a suite in the markets and spent the majority of their time shopping and visiting cultural venues. Occasionally, they went to see one of the major national institutions in the capital, including the Imperial Magic Academy and the Imperial Ministry of Magic. Overall, they appeared to be there for the curiosities offered in the Imperial Center and expressed disinterest and even disdain for what might be considered boring to a group of teenage girls. He supposed it was to be expected from a group of nobles from Riestais. The Empire was far more advanced than the kingdom that they were once from, so fruits of that advancement and its effects must have been more interesting than what were to them the unfathomable processes driving that advancement. Following her stay in our winter, the Baroness set off on her first assignment in the Northwest, acting in her role as liaison officer to the 2nd Legion. Ray's agents in Enns had either been chased off or detained by General Cabane in his general sweep to remove factional agents from the vicinity of the city, which was to be expected. What was left to him were the reports of the 2nd Legion, as well as any rumors that had made it to our winter. All of the information was broadly positive, so much so that it was suspect. He couldn't blame anyone for doing so. Who would dare say anything against the Sorceress Kingdom or any officials from the stupendously powerful nation? Any doomsayers were likely quashed out of fear of repercussions. The remaining positive reception was at least in part the result of efforts to curry favor. While it was understandable, it also added a degree of difficulty in discerning the truth. The rumors painted a glowing image of the woman that was more laughable than even the most inept attempts at generating imperial propaganda. With the markedly anticlimactic events that followed the rise of the Sorceress Kingdom, the social circles of the Empire must have been starved for fanciful gossip. The official reports distributed to the Imperial Army were scrubbed clean of anything that seemed a fabrication. What he found from them was far more realistic than what the rumors offered, though it had the characteristically sterile feel of anything that went through the court council and the capital's bureaucracy, appearing generally free of problematic statements. Lady Zaradnik helped to deliver 5 cavalry squads of Death Series servitors, and the 2nd Legion consulted with her over their use. A single company was acclimated to the undead, and from there that company worked with other companies to achieve the rapid adoption of the new forces. The same process was occurring with the 5th Legion, where one company in each division was put through their paces with the undead squads assigned to them, so that part of the report appeared to be credible. From there, the 2nd Legion proceeded with their operation to clear the blister. The major part of that operation took roughly a week, with the Viridian Dragon Lord last seen being chased towards the Azalisia Mountains by one of the Sorceress Kingdom's Frost Dragon slaves. Ray doubted that the Dragon Lord had survived intruding on the territory of their suzerain. The Baroness was generally well received by the 2nd Legion, who noted that, while she was a foreigner who was not entirely knowledgeable when it came to imperial culture, she was still pleasant to work with. Worries over being ordered around by some sort of undead being were proven to be unfounded, and she was very popular with the men. In short, the Sorceress Kingdom had chosen a tool suited for the job, turning what was feared to be a difficult process into an unexpectedly smooth and painless one. This should mean that, at the bare minimum, Baroness Zaradnik had a certain degree of charisma and enough knowledge imparted to her by the Sorceress Kingdom for the 2nd Legion to figure out the rest. In fact, that was all she needed. While not the most prestigious assignment, the 2nd Legion was arguably the most competent army group in the Empire. Be the tasked dragons, undead or whatever else, they would get things done, and the liaison officer's contributions did not need to be particularly noteworthy. With his expectations set to reasonable levels, Ray nodded to himself in satisfaction. Ensuring that the young noblewoman's experience with his battalion was a positive one was a priority. He would then do what he could to make his best impression upon her. She would in turn bring word of his quality back to her masters in the Sorcerer's Kingdom. From there, he would at least have a new weapon in his arsenal to employ in the political arenas of the Empire. If things went well, He might be returned to his position as the commander of an army group. In the best case, he would be scouted for his talents by the Sorceress Kingdom, where he would have all the power he could dare to dream of. Ray brushed his fingers over the table, leaning low to inspect its surface for dust and stains marring the reflected torchlight. While preparations could be made with some forewarning, an army camp usually wasn't the place to entertain a noble. He had done what he could and could only hope that the reception was seen as providing an authentic flavor to the experience rather than used to place him in a disadvantageous position for his lack of proper hospitality. Joachim Ward's reports never mentioned how Lady Zaradnik was accommodated in her time so far. His information was delivered in a way characteristic of the Imperial Army, which was dominated by taciturn men of stern demeanor. Reports focused on facts and figures revolving around results. There was no time or paper wasted on what were considered frivolous details, and what might be seen as embellishment was frowned severely upon. He could imagine how she went from place to place, however. According to his sources, Lady Zaradnik had arrived at Karlsheim but was intercepted by the 5th Legion. Baron Ward whisked her out of the city before people from the 6th Legion had located her, and they headed west along the Imperial Highway to the town of Courts with an undead cavalry squad in tow. There, they stayed overnight at the Count's manor, departing the following morning to arrive at Baron Ward's manor in the evening. It was there that Joachim Ward attached himself to the Baroness, who reportedly said next to nothing about his assignment to her. After that, she headed west past Orenstead and around the mountains, heading south to the fortress garrison at the southernmost point of the Katza Marches where the 4th and 5th Divisions were stationed. It was there that she started her work, incorporating Death Series servitors to the 3rd Division of the 5th Legion, which was responsible for that area of the southern border. She took one of their companies north along the mountains for an orientation with their new supplementary forces. They then headed east to Orenstead before she parted ways with them, heading to Karlsheim to pick up the next undead squad and start the familiarization process with the next division. The Imperial Army used administrative villages as waypoints for their patrols, so it stood to reason that she stayed at the manors of the local lords during her time in the southern frontier thus far. Even if she did not specifically request it, they would still offer her their hospitality. Given the dour nature of frontier nobles, however, Ray couldn't imagine that it was very entertaining for someone who had previously spent over a week in our winter for personal leisure. Bennett came up to the table, waiting quietly as Ray continued to examine his preparations. "What do you think about our guest, sir?" Bennett asked. "Or the preparations you've made for her?" Ray looked up from the table to bestow a frown upon the cleric. "Baroness Zaradnik." "I couldn't detect anything wrong with her," Bennett said. "She doesn't show any sign of being a vampire or any other sort of undead that might pass for a human, neither does she emit an undead reaction. There isn't anything strange about her behavior that suggests mind control or other types of compulsion." "Did Testania take a look at her?" "He didn't detect any illusions. The scouts I brought along said that there's little to note about her personal strength. Our mages haven't noticed anything significant on the magical front. By all appearances, she appears to be the young scion of an aristocratic house with the mannerisms to match." When correlated with the information he already possessed, it appeared that there wouldn't be much to expect from the former noble of Riastais. It was frustratingly ironic that the corrupt and incompetent wastrels of that rotting nation now basked undeservedly in the benefits of the Sorceress Kingdom's stupendous power. How are the men receiving her? As well as one would expect of 1,000 young men on the edge of nowhere suddenly finding an attractive young noblewoman in their midst. Ray narrowed his eyes. He would need to assign an escort detail to her whenever she came to visit. The last thing he needed was some overeager young idiot ruining everything for him. "Did she come with any undead?" "She didn't, thank the gods. By all reports, she appeared on her own." He furrowed his brow at the irregular detail. "On her own, as in alone?" Ray asked. "Not even with footmen from Baron Ward?" "No escort," Bennett answered. "Not even a horse." "She walked?" Ray couldn't imagine Baron Ward allowing her to go anywhere without an escort. If she hadn't even secured a mount, she must have snuck out somehow. Though Ray's raids had driven the demi-human tribes into the mouth of the wilderness valley, a woman walking alone in the frontier was still a heedless risk. Was she some sort of reckless idiot? An empty-headed girl who wanted to spend her time in an army camp surrounded by knights in shining armor? Or maybe there was something else going on. Considering the growing tension between the 5th and 6th Legions, Lord Ward might have been instructed to detain her for as long as humanly possible. Either way, she was a catastrophe waiting to happen if left to her own devices. "I wonder how many times Priest Ward has lost track of the Baroness," Ray muttered. "She could have been interacting with her agents or other factions at any time and we have no idea who they are." "That shouldn't be a worry here, sir," Bennett said. "There are far too many eyes on her now." "We'll have to assign a group to watch over her regardless," Ray told him. "She's essentially a foreign dignitary from the Empire's suzerain. If anything happens to her, there will be hell to pay." He sent an officer to retrieve Lady Zaradnik, firmly entrenching his initial objectives in his mind. Though her careless eagerness was problematic in certain ways, it also meant that she was likely easy to please and easy to impress. The Sorceress Kingdom's liaison officer arrived shortly after Bennett's report, accompanied by one of the squads on security duty. He sighed internally as a cursory examination confirmed his developing suspicions. She was adorned in an immaculate equestrian outfit with a forest green coat. Instead of a helmet, she wore a silvery circlet. An exquisite blue crystal hairpin fashioned into a single feather held up her long, chestnut hair. Rather than a woman equipped for war, she was one fashionably adorned for a refreshing ride through some pastoral idyll. The stylish, militant look plainly expressed her desire for an attractive appearance while at the same time attempting to convey a sense of martial gravity. Perhaps if she were an adventurer, it might have been seen as reasonable as they tended to wear outfits that advertised themselves. The fact that his scouts couldn't sense any strength from her, however, only revealed her for what she was, a pretty face maintaining the pretense of power and importance. Ray fixed his face into a welcoming smile, performing a respectful bow. "Welcome to my encampment, my lady," he said. "I'm General Ray." "Thank you for your welcome, General Ray. Baroness Ludmilla Zaradnik. I hope my men have made your visit enjoyable while I was out on the field." "Yes, they've all been very friendly, thank you," the young noblewoman smiled. "You have many brave and energetic soldiers serving under you, Your Excellency." At the least, she displayed signs of training that probably made her effective in her tasks with the 2nd Legion. Nothing slipped past her polite mask and cordial words as she carried herself in a manner that was attractive to the vast majority of men in the Imperial Army. Her actions thus far, however, betrayed much of her true nature. It was characteristic of many foolish nobles who put on their masks, thinking that doing so concealed everything else about them. She would be easier to read as long as he stayed apprised of her activities. "Well, please have a seat, my lady." He swept his arm out to the chair prepared for her. "Dinner will be served soon. It will be modest fare compared to what a manor may provide, but I still hope it's to your taste." They settled down to have dinner, with Ray introducing each course with a suitable degree of eloquence. Most of it was some combination of the supplies delivered to the camp and efforts at foraging and hunting by the battalion's rangers. It was a good, hearty meal by the Wyvern Mark's standards, but it couldn't compare to the high cuisine of our winter. He gauged Lady Zaradnik's reactions carefully, trying to discern her preferences. "I suppose you're well accustomed to this fare by now," he said. "Everyone along the border must have offered something similar." "There were slight differences from place to place," she replied, "but yes. Overall, it's quite distinct from the cuisine in our winter or the Northwest." Did that count as a good thing, or a bad thing? Ray examined and re-examined her response, trying to get a feel for the tactics that she had brought to the table. The scouts might not have detected a significant amount of raw strength from her, but it didn't mean that she didn't excel in some other way. Reistize's nobles were militarily abhorrent and somewhat passable in an administrative sense but were most well known for their flavor of politics and intrigue. That they could pursue their craft even while their nation crumbled around their heads was mind-boggling, but stupidity did not make skills and abilities any less potent when employed. For the time being, she appeared to be getting a feel for Ray and his men, probing points that she thought might be sensitive and looking for cracks to exploit. It would be something like gaining an edge in negotiations by establishing a superior position through every means necessary, even the suggestion of not offering suitable hospitality during every portion of her stay. Every detail was potentially a piece of her arsenal. How she would ultimately use each piece and what he could prepare in defense would be crucial for the subtle plays for power that continually occurred between them. "My lady," Ray said, "since you've now arrived to carry out your duties, might I ask what your plans are for the 6th Legion?" From the reports that I've received of the 5th Legion's jurisdiction, the undead forces from the Sorceress Kingdom are now being incorporated, but we have had no such forces assigned to aid us. That came as a surprise to me as well, Your Excellency, Lady Zaradnik replied. My understanding was that the Death Series servitors would be deployed to the Wyvern Mark and the larger portion of my assignment here would involve your campaign in the wilderness. I had some expectations that both legions would, by necessity, be collaborating in the effort, with one army group ensuring that the Wyvern Mark stayed secure and the other going on the offensive, but these roles manifested in a rather strange way. So it was someone on the Empire's side. Or was it? It could have just as easily been everything he had surmised and Lady Zaradnik was playing innocent to draw some sort of reaction out of him. Either way, knowing that it happened did not indicate the motives behind the move and the Baroness was expressing the 6th Legion's initial expectations from a slightly different angle. It was the verbal equivalent of moving to his side and asking for him to confide in her. Ray weighed the benefits of going along with her maneuvering. It was too dangerous to play along until he had some idea of what she wanted. Still, she continued, it is as you say, I am here to carry out my duties. I've seen to the least undead forces and will review the 5th Legion's progress in their adoption once they've had a chance to circulate them through their companies. For the time being, I'd like to observe the 6th Legion's operations as an expeditionary force. According to General Gregan, you've made the most progress thus far. He frowned inwardly as she continued speaking without waiting for his response. Did she just throw off their rhythm to jar him into responding to her prompt? One of the first things that noble scions learned was that men love to showcase their expertise and achievements. This could be used to gain insights and information for a trivial cost, so boys were taught to be mindful of what they shared while girls were taught how they could use their charms to draw what they wanted out of men. I see. Ray reached out for his wine. It's a shame you hadn't come earlier when we were sorting out of the border, my lady. We'll be breaking camp in the morning and setting up the first of our outposts in the wilderness. Forgive me, Your Excellency, but I don't understand why that might be a problem. The goblet stopped halfway to his lips. He set it down again and turned a perplexed look at the Baroness. You're currently staying at Ward Manor, yes? I was last night, Lady Zaradnik replied, but I'll be accompanying your battalion now. Accompanying? Do you mean to say that you'll be following us into the wilderness? Will that be a problem, Your Excellency? Would it? It wouldn't. He had expected his time to be limited as she moved around the 6th Legion's camps, but now she would be on hand for an extended period. There would be time to thoroughly gain an understanding of the young noblewoman, her motives and what would best be used to solicit her favor. Not at all, my lady, he smiled. You are most welcome to join us. I will arrange a detail of strong, reliable men for your bodyguard. Was Joachim Ward of service to you? If you so desire, I will arrange for him to continue attending to your needs. He was, thank you, the Baroness replied. I wouldn't mind if he continued to assist me. Excellent. Did you have any preferences that we should be aware of, my lady? Preferences? Food, beverage, Ray waved a hand loosely, the type of escort you'd like to have. Any special arrangements? I'm here to observe your operations, Your Excellency, Lady Zaradnik said. It would hardly do to disrupt them with selfish demands. Please keep any arrangements on my behalf to a suitable minimum. Ray nodded, turning his attention to the cooling meal before him. So far, she was taking the classic noblewoman's approach, which involved adopting an attitude that was accommodating and subservient rather than assertive and confrontational when men of power were present. It also had the effect of leading other parties into postures that they felt comfortable with, a stiletto that worked open gaps through which a noblewoman could observe or manipulate them. Leading others in this manner also had the effect of hinting at a noblewoman's intent. Ray had every intention of peeling off her silken glove to reveal the hand it concealed. Was your work with the 2nd Legion similar to this, my lady? Somewhat, Lady Zaradnik replied. The camp was outside of Enns, so I alternated between working with General Carbane in the city and the companies out in the field. Did you follow them into the blister? I did. I was present until the main action was concluded and the army withdrew to resume regular operations. In that case, Ray said, things should be somewhat similar to your work with the 2nd Legion. In the camp, at any rate. The wilderness here is nowhere near as treacherous as the blister, but it does have its own dangers. With this valley more suited to cavalry operations, however, you'll be able to see the 6th Legion's finest men at their best.